Good morning, Luma.
Good morning.
So happy we're together after a year of talking about this, and we finally did it.
Yeah.
And so you're a lecturer in psychology in RCSI, and you have your doctoral candidate in Cambridge University in psych.
Yes.
So would you mind telling us what's the difference between psychology and psychiatry?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. So first, really excited to be here.
Yeah.
I know we're going to have great conversation.
Like every day we have this conversation.
We do it every day, so we might as well put it on the platform.
Yeah.
It's about time.
Yeah.
So psychology is such a big realm, and it can have many facets, many strains. You can have social psychology, health psychology. You can be a clinical psychologist, which means you deliver therapy. But typically the misconception is that everyone who's a psychologist can do therapy, which is not the case.
Okay, so how can someone be a therapist? So a therapist is different than a psychologist.
So yes, so a clinical psychologist is a therapist.
Okay.
And even a therapist has their own title and license.
Okay.
But clinical psychologists and therapists have the license to practice giving therapy one-on-one.
Okay.
And I'm a non-clinical psychologist. So I fall into the realm of social and health psychology. And that type of psychology focuses on population health or public health, but in the mental health sphere. So when we talk about psychology, we look at human behavior in the health context of, let's say, sleeping, nutrition, exercise, stress management, and stress. And we try to assess, why do people behave this way? How do they behave this way? How can we change their behavior, more importantly? And also thinking about how do we develop and design interventions that help change people? So interventions are better known as programs that influence change behavior. So that's really what psychology is. Psychiatry, you will need to go into medical school to specialize into psychiatry. So it's very much a medical angle.
Medical school, as in 7 years?
7 years, depending on where you do it with the residency, exactly.
Okay.
And psychiatrists, this is not the only difference, of course, between psychiatrists and psychologists, but psychiatrists can prescribe medication, psychotropic medication, which is, let's say, for depression, anxiety, PTSD, all these mental disorders, whereas a psychologist who is a therapist or clinical psych will not be able to.
Okay.
So if they think, for example, a clinical psychologist, that their patient needs medication, they would automatically refer them to a psychiatrist. So the real difference is in the training of medical training versus non-medical training. And to add to that complexity, so I'm doing a PhD in psychiatry, but I'm a research-based practitioner. So again, non-medical cannot practice one-on-one, but I can develop and design programs that change behavior on, let's say, a higher level. So on a larger scale.
Yeah. Okay. So who are the people that goes to a psychologist and a psychiatrist? So if I'm looking for someone, let's say me, I'm in a bad state, who should I go for?
So it really depends on where you are, unfortunately. You might find that you're in a country with very few licensed clinical psychologists or very few psychiatrists. So first of all, the availability and checking their qualifications is really important to make sure that the right people are available. Now, if you feel that you're going through a very stressful time, a hard time, maybe you've lost a loved one, maybe you've gone through a very traumatic experience, whether it's small t or big T. So small t trauma could be, you remember some childhood difficulties or you were bullied in school. Big T could mean you're a refugee, you've been displaced, you lost your home to a fire.
Okay.
And in most cases, I tend to recommend going to a psychologist first. And this is when you find that you can still run your daily activities as much as you can. So you are socially active and you are able to maintain your basic needs, like going to work, preparing your meals. So a psychologist will be good to assess you and then determine whether you need further higher level help with a psychiatrist and medication. Others choose the different angle. There's nothing wrong with going to a psychiatrist first. A psychiatrist can just as well assess if you need medication or you don't, and therefore you will benefit more from a psychologist in the long term. But when you are struggling, particularly to do your daily activities, when you are finding it hard to get out of bed, when you are sleeping too much or sleeping too little, there are very unique symptoms that both can assess you for to understand what you're going through and whether you're suffering from, for example, anxiety, depression, or something more than that.
Yeah. Okay. You're so passionate about what you do. And I love how you talk about it. And I know that you have your master's degree in also marketing. So what made you shift those careers? So like it's, and you were a banker as well.
So yes, to an extent, 100%. So I did a bachelor's in psychology at the American University of Beirut. And just to briefly say how Beirut changed my feeling of identity. So I used to, and I admit this very openly, that I was very ashamed to be Arab and Khaliji as a teenager.
How come, yani? Why?
Yeah, and the reason is I was very nerdy. I really was into my books and intellectual and thinking. I was a bit of a snob in that sense. And I thought it was so much better to be thinking about books and reading and learning about these intellectuals. And I'd look around and I thought our culture valued flashiness, valued materialism, valued how somebody looked versus how their mind thought. And I was like, this is not for me. I need to leave here. I was very determined to leave. And September 11 happened. So I had no choice but to go to Lebanon, where most of my friends were moving, as well as all the Arabs who were moving from America to the Middle East.
Okay.
So I wasn't that excited to begin with to head there. But then suddenly you engage and you delve into Lebanese culture. They are so savvy politically, so savvy and knowledgeable about their history, which I had never learned about until I got there. And I minored in Middle Eastern history. And so they brought this passion in understanding my culture, my psychology, our behavior, our identity. And so it really changed me.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And from there, I learned about something called cross-cultural psychology. So I specialized in psychology, learned about cross-cultural psychology. So most people now talk about this concept of decolonization. So let's decolonize our way of thinking. Let's stop thinking the way we've been imperialized by the English or the Americans never imperialized. They were much later on, but the French, etc., and their ways of thinking. Let's stop assuming that they're correct in their way of thinking, because when you think about it, most research is published on Western populations, white Western populations. Very little research was done on women or non-Western populations to this day.
Why?
I think they were the main researchers. They started the conversation of research, or at the same time, they had more resources. So when the universities started to develop in the 8th century, 9th century, yes, the Middle Easterners were the first to establish very important aspects in knowledge acquisition, such as geometry, architecture, etc. But that timing just kind of shortened, and it stopped at some point.
Yeah.
So it kind of transpired into, with the movement of imperialism, the Portuguese, the English, all of that knowledge acquisition started to move to England, UK, and to the US eventually. So that's where research really took a forefront, and obviously technology improved. So we had more access to books and publications because of their research in particular, because of them. So long story short, I learned that psychology didn't have to mean that all the knowledge that we learned about psychology, such as what depression looks like or what anxiety looks like, comes from a Western mind. It can actually, we can delve into Middle Eastern culture and understand, how does distress manifest? Like, do we all get depressed? Do we all lack sleep? Do we all feel this weird feeling in our stomach when we get anxious? Does it apply universally is the question. Are we all the same in how we interpret mental distress? And that was 20 years ago. I'm aging myself here, but 20 years ago. And after I left, I come back home, obviously, excited to apply what I've learned. I had known very quickly on I didn't want to be a therapist or a clinical psychologist.
So you knew that you did not want to.
I knew this very early on. And when I was ready to work, there were no opportunities. The best opportunities you could get were, as you know, the banking industry. and I jumped into the communications department. So I actually spent 10 years in communications in different industries, whether it was banking or culture or information. And within that, it was fantastic to utilize communication tools and marketing tools. And you say that there is a difference, but actually marketing is very much psychology. It's human behavior. It's how do we think? How do we respond to advertising? How do we influence someone to buy a property or to invest in real estate or to invest in asset management? How do we target our different populations? So targeting your population, who you want to change or get them to buy something from you or influence, it's all about defining them in a very clear way. So to define a profile of, let's say, a high net worth individual for an investment bank, it's about how old are they going to be? What nationality are they? What's their lifestyle on a daily basis? Do they rent yachts in the Mediterranean on their summer vacations? Do they enjoy having a second or third home for their families? Do they appreciate real estate and understand the market so well that we need to show them that we're a step ahead? So you're literally defining the age. How many kids do they have? What education do they have? That is, to me, psychology.
Okay.
You are learning about your buyer or consumer, and then you are putting your products together in a way to present it to them in the most appealing way. And as you can see from your personal training work, you know who to target now. You know the age group, you know the gender, you know where to put your ads in social media, for example. So all of this marketing is psychology.
It is.
And
interesting to see it in that way.
Yeah. And nudges and boosts, for example. So I'm sure you've heard of nudges and boosts when you do social media.
Okay.
A lot of the advertising is nudging people to click here, message there, call this person, follow us, and listen to our podcast. That's a nudge. That's do this, but they're not forcing you. The boost is, let's make it very in front of their face. So you know that annoying ad of that jumper that keeps coming back, and you're like, I don't need a jumper, but I mentioned it once in my life, and they're listening to me. So you know when you're going through somebody's stories and you see, this jumper, I'm not interested, but it keeps coming back. It's always in your face. And suddenly you're like, you know what? It's actually nice.
Let me see. What is this about? And it keeps popping until it's like, okay, let me see. What is this?
100%.
Okay.
So those are called nudges and boost interventions, and you can use them in any context. You can make people buy something. You can make people donate money. You can make people follow a community and like something more because of it. So all of this is psychology. So when I had completed those 10 years, I realized that I had learned as much as I could, and I always loved the challenge. And I had been involved in, working with the government during 2011 uprisings, which was a very unfortunate time for us, but it made me learn a lot about what I wanted to do and how I could help better outside the system. So I went back to psychological research.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. So interesting to see. I feel like it's such a deep topic that you would never stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Amazing. So what's your role exactly to lecture med students about what exactly?
Yeah. So as a psychologist lecturer, we talk about psychology in the context of medical care. So one aspect is we teach medical students how do they develop their characters and build resilience, both in the workplace and personally. Because you can imagine physicians or future physicians are very stressed. Medical school is one of the most challenging things. So that's one aspect. A second aspect is we learn to teach students how to build better relationships with their patients. So what does that look like? We call it person-centered or patient-centered care. And you may recognize this, maybe not. We actually have fantastic healthcare in the Middle East, but if you go abroad, you'll notice that patients become 1 in a million. If you go to an emergency room, you're waiting 3 hours at a time for a broken leg. And when you do get to see the doctor, you have 5 minutes with the doctor, if barely. And he's basically telling you, you have this, you're going to be fine, goodbye. It's very little time. It's seen as they're treating a diagnosis or a symptom rather than a person. And we're trying to move away from that. So what we call functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, we train physicians to understand, or future physicians, how do you delve into the root cause of their issue, by understanding the biopsychosocial approach, which is not just looking at their biomarkers from blood tests or clinical assessments. That's very important, but it's not the full picture. You want to look at their psychological behavior and background. So what is their socioeconomic status? Can they afford healthcare? Are they raised in a place that allows them access to going to hospitals or, let's say, a physiotherapist clinic? Or is it somewhere that's really far and they don't have transport? What are their beliefs and attitudes towards seeking healthcare? Are they people who tend to go to a doctor when they need something? Or do they feel like, oh, the doctor is lying to me, they're just going to charge me a lot of money, and then I'm not going to find out what I need, and they'll just give me more medication? So understanding the attitudes of the patient and then understanding their behaviors. So we know we're in a world where everybody's growing up older, living longer, hopefully living healthier. But with that said, that means you have a larger elderly adult population, which is 65 plus, who are retired, so they're not working. They depend a lot more on the healthcare system because maybe they have diabetes or other chronic diseases like heart disease. And with that said, they might need more medication, more spending is on them. And we need to understand, how are their habits? Are they taking the medications on time? Are they adhering to them?
But do you think there is time for a physician or a doctor to actually assess each patient? That's the question. Is it that easy to do that?
Yeah.
Can you imagine a doctor, how many patients he has to see? So is it actually part of his job to do that? Or at least, like you said, just make them understand a glimpse of that?
It's a tough decision. You're completely correct that doctors are overwhelmed. Some of them are seeing 200-300 patients in a day.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the life that they live. And as you said, it can be unrealistic. So we have interventions and programs that train physicians within 5 minutes to give advice that is a change maker in their behavior. And that 5-minute intervention, we call it the brief intervention. Literally less than 5 minutes, the doctor is sitting with you. He asks you questions like, do you drink alcohol? Do you smoke cigarettes or smoke any other kind, shisha, vape, whatever? And as soon as they say yes to either, you immediately give them advice. You say you should quit smoking because of the dangers and risks that are associated with getting cardiovascular disease. So you empower them with information and you immediately give them the advice in a non-judgmental way.
All right.
5 minutes can be very powerful. And when we train students to think about all three, we're not saying you have time to ask all three or all three aspects of psycho and social and bio, but you can quickly understand when a patient who is 60 plus, elderly, maybe diabetic, maybe struggling to maintain glucose levels, you're sharp enough to pick up, okay, this person's having trouble adhering to the medication probably, or there's something with their diet, and there's something related to their behavior that's not helping them discipline themselves to maintain that diet or take that medication.
Interesting. Yeah. So like you said, but is there enough time for a doctor? Let's say, is it in his scope of practice or field for him to advise these kind of things? Let's say I'm a woman, I would go for a gynecologist. Let's say I have any kind of issues with my hormones, my period. So automatically she would do an ultrasound test and she would say, okay, there's nothing wrong, let's say. What else can she do? Is it in her scope of practice to tell me, okay, you should go see someone? Or is it okay for her to ask me, okay, how's your lifestyle? What's your nutrition? What do you do? Do you train? You know what I mean? So are you doing that as well to make them understand to the root cause of the issue or the disease or whatever they're going through?
Yeah.
So
that is the goal. So most doctors, when they're trained to eventually specialize in a system. Let's say it's the endocrine system, so they become endocrinologists, or it's the cardiovascular system, so they become cardio specialists, etc. So when they learn that, they are taught to understand the system functioning alone. They don't train them to understand the cardiovascular system as it functions with all our other systems, the nervous system, the endocrine system, the hormonal system. So, and I'm not saying education hasn't changed to improve this, but this was the past. And so doctors had to continue educating themselves, as they should, to learn about how the systems function together, to figure out if this female's hormonal issues are related to her hormones or her thyroid gland or something more and deeper. But yes, they have the power to refer, and they always have. And they do have the right to ask all these questions. If anything, if I have a doctor who asks me these questions, I would give him a 5-star. I'd be like, this is the doctor I would recommend everyone to go to. Instead of seeing like your one symptom as just related to, let's say, the hot flashes, just about your period, or just about aging, or you're immediately perimenopausal because you get hot flashes and you never got them. So the other side of it, of course, is we have to talk about patient knowledge, but that's on a separate note of how active and proactive should patients be when they look for a specialist, when they investigate their needs. They need to also be empowered with their own information and know their bodies before they go to these doctors, because they have to be ready to discuss where it could go or how they're feeling and why maybe they feel they're unheard, like the doctor's not really listening to them, and maybe making them feel like what they're feeling is not there, or not important, or you're exaggerating, or not real symptoms. So it's a two-way street. We no longer look at conventional medicine where it's you go to the doctor is the boss, he tells you what to do, he tells you which medication to take, and you say yes and you do it. It's now a relationship between the doctor and the patient, and you both have to come to an understanding. So if the doctor says, well, clearly you are struggling with these really fast palpitations, and your heart's not beating very well, your blood pressure is high, it sounds like you might have hypertension, how do you feel about taking these meds and starting an exercise regimen that is ABC? And then you tell him that, actually, I've never exercised in my life. So you have to work together to come to a middle ground. To develop a plan that works for the both of you and achieves the goal at the same time.
When you said functional medicine, what does that mean exactly? So is that what you meant by them having like a holistic health?
Yes.
So the aim is to combine conventional medicine with that together, or have a separate professions? That's
it's a tough
because I've
question.
seen it a lot right now. Like people study and call themselves holistic doctors or holistic coach, or so is. How do you feel about that?
Many out there.
Yeah.
I mean, so even traditional doctors who've gone to traditional medical school have a weary eye. They question this functional movement. And their theory is that at the end of the day, we'll always come back to the basic biology and biomarkers and empowering the patient, which has already become a standard in conventional medicine. Functional medicine, in my opinion, could be something that a medical trained student that wants to specialize later becomes specialized in functional medicine. So they later develop more understanding about how functional medicine works. And functional medicine, really, the core of it is understanding how lifestyle influences behavior and also influences your risk of getting a chronic disease, such as heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So those are usually the 3-4 horsemen, they call them. When you're able to understand the reasons the patient has fallen into this trap, whether they inherited cancer or diabetes, or they've never been empowered to know what a healthy diet looks like, or maybe they developed it as a child and they have no power over it because the family feeds them that way, and that's what they're being fed. So you can change a lot more as a functional medicine doctor in the behavior sphere, but working using conventional medicine practices. So I'm of the say that conventional medicine is necessary. So if you were diagnosed with cancer, I would immediately say, or if you have very interesting or unusual symptoms, go investigate it with a professional licensed doctor, find out how or what is going on, get the right scans according to them, keep investigating if they're not really giving you the answer you want, or they're dismissing your symptoms, and keep finding out what that is. And if you are diagnosed inshallah, yani, no one does. But if you are diagnosed with these big diseases, go to the professional. If you have cancer, you've been diagnosed with cancer, go to the cancer professional, go to the oncologist, learn how to reduce your risk. What is the ideal treatment plan? If chemo or radiation is needed, go for it. You may want to study it a little bit more to understand if surgery is needed. Listen to your doctors. And if you want a second opinion, you have the right to get a second opinion. At the same time, once you're done with the main treatments, you may explore holistic approaches with professionals as well. And holistic coaches, to be honest, I don't think there are any qualifications that allow you to recommend supplements or do tests unless you actually go through official schools related to that.
Yeah.
So I would be very wary of these titles. I would also always go to an MD, a medical degree practitioner, when you're going through the conventional side. But when you come to holistics, there is research. Even the National Institute of Cancer on their website will list all the non-medical or, let's say, herbal, supplemental, physio, acupuncture aspects that have been found to be beneficial for cancer patients. So if you go to the National Institute of Cancer's website and you check their holistic treatments, they have a list of, for example, they'll say turmeric and ginger. Turmeric is known to reduce inflammation. We know that cancer is triggered by inflammation. So we recommend, if you want to take turmeric, go for it, but check with your doctor, because if you've just, most of the time before a surgery, they'll tell you don't take turmeric or don't take certain supplements. So you want to know the timeline in which you're allowed to do these things. Don't self-supplement, don't self-diagnose. But even acupuncture, for example, is known to reduce symptoms of fatigue, nausea in cancer patients going through chemo, and they are even recommended by the doctors themselves. So, for example, in the States, you have some of the biggest hospitals like Anderson, MD, and Harvard and Stanford. All their medical hospitals have a holistic or integrative, what they call integrative or functional medicine clinic side programs. So for their cancer patients, they actually have Reiki. They have needling. They have a nutritionist who advises them. So it's integrated. That's what we call it. So conventional with functional becomes integrated to give you the best option to reduce symptoms from treatment that you will need. So that's what we really talk about when we say functional or integrative.
Okay. You answered the question very beautifully.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So you mentioned research. And I know it's been going around so much when we see anyone out there saying a researcher said or a study said. So how can I know how can I search something to know the studies behind this thing? Let's say you just gave an example of turmeric, like supplementation. How can I know the studies behind it? What are the things that I should look for? And I know that's part of your job, which I want to get into and understand how does a research thing goes. So
it's such an important question, and it makes me very frustrated when I see people post a random study on Instagram and be like, oh, look, this supplement is fantastic for your hormonal side effects. Like, oh, you're having hot flashes? Take this. It's a winner. It'll work for everybody. No, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And I'll tell you why.
But sorry, there's this thing I saw once. So funny. So they say they did a study on people that if you tell someone a study shows, they're most likely going to believe anything they say. So there's a study on people hearing a study shows. You know what I mean? So this word as well makes it such a huge thing, because you just say, a study shows that there's this method would reduce pain. This study shows method. So I feel like you have to clear that out to people in terms of that. So
thank you for making that point, because I use that. I'm a culprit of that. Like when I present my work, I'll say studies have shown that.
But that's your job.
But it is
it's your job. And I can't say, or anyone would say, في دراسات تقول إن زين. Okay, I would say, okay, وين هالدراسات؟ شنو هالدراسات؟ فلما if I would come and tell people or someone what is those studies, I want to know, what am I looking for? in that study to make sure that this person is saying something right.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it raises even more red flags about how do you evaluate whether a study is done well. Like, is it showing the truth that you want it to show? So there are two concepts within research: validity and reliability.
Okay.
Validity means, are they actually testing what they said they were going to test? So in the case of this turmeric, let's give that a study example. Turmeric reduces inflammation in cancer patients. So it's saying it's doing that. How are they testing it? Are they testing it by asking the cancer patients, do you feel less inflamed? Because that sounds suspicious.
Yeah.
Are they testing their blood biomarkers that are related to inflammation? So for example, creatine or CRP is an inflammatory biomarker. So if you have high CRP, then you may have some inflammation in the body. It's one of many biomarkers. So, okay, let's say they're testing that, but they tested it after they gave everyone turmeric. So how do you know it's gotten better? Because you don't have a pre-test. You didn't test them before they got the turmeric. So that's another way to assess, are they truly testing what they're supposed to test?
Okay.
The second question is, how many people are in this study? So if you're telling me 5 people were in your study, and it is a very basic study that's testing something that's been tested 1,000 times before, and we know a lot about it. So we know, for example, that Xanax reduces anxiety. It's an antidepressant. Sometimes people use it to reduce anxiety, and it works. And they used it on people who are anxious, and they saw that it worked. And then you decided to repeat the study, but do it on Arab people just to see, does it work on Arab people? And you brought 5 people. It's not enough to say that it's going to be effective. You don't have enough of a sample size, is what we call. So sample sizes can be calculated to a T, where you find out, and I'm not going to go into that science, but I would typically say that ideally you want at least 100 people in that study, at least.
At least.
Yeah. For that study to feel somewhat useful.
And how many % of success rate, let's say?
Great question. So they should state that there was a statistically significant change in outcomes between the two groups. So I have to now go into comparison versus intervention groups. The intervention group is the one that gets the medication. So let's say they got the Xanax. The other group is the comparison. They did not get the Xanax, but you track both of them. Okay. You ask them the same, you assess them the same way, measurements, blood, whatever you're assessing them for, you're asking the same. So maybe you ask them, and tested them on an anxiety scale. You're like on a scale of 0 to 5, something that is validated, a measure that says you're anxious or not. All of them had high anxiety, both groups. After 6 to 8 weeks of giving them the meds, because that is typically the cycle to see a change. Okay. You ask them the same questions after the end of that 6 to 8 cycle. The intervention group, the majority showed that their anxiety improved. Whereas the majority of the comparison showed that they didn't improve. They stayed the same. There are statistical tests that you can conduct to compare the two groups and say whether actually the difference was there, but it was so small, it wasn't really that significant. So actually the drug is not that good. Or you'll be like, it's so statistically significant, such a high difference between the two groups, that this medication is actually really effective. And even if you can't read that academic jargon, the abstract, which comes at the start of the paper, summarizes all of this in the results. So it summarizes what the purpose is, how they did it, what the results are statistically or not statistically significant, and then why this matters. Why do we care that this worked? Now, having said that, this is based on one study. We never depend on saying that something works or something is accurate based on one. Okay. You need multiple studies, sometimes over time, and ideally more recent ones to say that this is correct. Yeah. And you can assess this based on one paper. So you can find a paper published last year, which is very recent. Anything within the last 5 years is great because it's the most up to date. And you'll see Xanax is effective in treating anxiety in this tribe in sub-Saharan Africa. And they used 100 people or 40, even 40. In these types of studies, you can go even smaller, 50 in the intervention, 50 in the comparison. and they found statistically significant results. And in their introduction, they're summarizing everything that's been found on this topic. Their job, if it's an excellent paper, is to summarize the first time that we found out Xanax works and who it works on and what does it work on. And from the studies that are published, what's wrong with them. So finding gaps in what's happened before so that you justify why you're doing it. And obviously, as I mentioned, I think previously in our chats, look at the journal title and look at the author's affiliation. So
which means?
That means the journal title, you can Google the title to find out what its ranking is. If it has a high ranking based on what we call an H index, that means it's a very good quality journal and you can depend on it because somebody is doing the rigorous review on your behalf. They're making sure this is all accurate before allowing it to be published. They won't even accept the paper in the first place. And they get 2 reviewers who are independent from the study to review it from A to Z that are experts in the field. So they will mark the gaps. So if they don't think it's good enough, it doesn't get published. So the journal is enough technically to tell you this is a good paper. The second aspect, if you're unsure about how good this journal is, look at the author's affiliation and their background. Have they been publishing on this field at least 10, 20, 30 papers? Have they published in relatively high quality journals, what we call quarter 1 or quarter 2, Q1, Q2? If those are the publications that they publish in or journals they publish in, then you can safely say, I can trust this author. And I can trust this journal. And it's a good exercise as well when you're on Instagram and you follow someone who sounds like they know what they're talking about. They're very good communicators. Just go and look for them on ResearchGate. That's a platform where you can find all researchers and you'll see what have they published. And you find out, oh, actually don't have that many publications and unrelated to what they're talking about. Should I be trusting this person? Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay. And can you share any recent study you have done?
Yes. So as part of my PhD, which I still have another year to go, as you know, and I've complained about all the time.
I've been with you throughout this
You've been before and hopefully until it
inshallah,
ends.
And then call you Dr. Luma.
Inshallah. Hope so. So one of the papers I'm about to submit for publication is a systematic review. So systematic reviews, what we do is we delve into a topic and we find all the papers related to that and we summarize them and analyze them. The topic that I picked is looking at mental health and psychosocial support interventions targeting Middle East and North African refugees in the MENA region or Middle East and North Africa. And what I really wanted to know is what interventions, what programs that change behavior to improve mental health have been done for these refugees in that region. How many, number one? Where have they been done? What do they typically target? So, for example, are they targeting resilience skills? Are they trying to improve someone's ability to, like, empowering women who have gone through intimate partner violence, for example? So understanding who their target is, what they're trying to improve. A lot of them don't necessarily aim just primarily to improve mental health or anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of them are actually trying to empower women economically. So one of the favorite studies that I analyzed within this paper was called the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Children Initiative. So it recruited, I believe, around 40-something Palestinian women who are refugees in Lebanon to train them in hygiene practice and cooking on larger scales. And they helped to train them to cook for children healthy meals to give them and sell them at schools. And they would sell it to the same schools over the academic year. So that was 8 months. So they were employed, they were doing things they were good at, but they learned to do it on a larger scale, and they developed a community. So what were the benefits from that study? They found that they were more economically empowered. They were actually bringing money into the family so they could raise their children, raise the family, support them. They developed community bonds, so they became friends with the other women. They started to share their experiences together about whether it was trauma from being displaced or just the struggles of daily life as women. And then third was their quality of life was reported to be improved. And when we say quality of life, we're talking about how do you feel about your life on a daily basis? It's a great measure to assess somebody's mental well-being, how they feel. Are they feeling good? Do they feel content in their lives? And that study showed a high improvement on quality of life. So that's what I mean by interventions that support mental health indirectly, not necessarily directly. So the paper, hopefully when it gets published, I'm happy to share that. But
inshallah.
we only found 38 programs since 2011. And I chose 2011 because it was the Syrian war. And that was where the largest displacement of a population of refugees had happened. So in the world, we have 122 million refugees, or displaced people, let's say, people who have been pushed out of their countries because of war, conflict, persecution. From those 122 million, 43 million are refugees. So refugees are ones that had to go to another country and leave their own. There's internally displaced, which means they are stuck in their own country, which I can talk about separately. But the refugees are the ones that are leaving their own. So from there, where do you think they live? Where do you think these refugees tend to live? Do they live in high-income countries, low-income, middle-income? Where do they end up going? Do you want to take a guess?
Like I'd say low
income, yeah?
Yeah.
Most people think it's high income. So the media makes us assume that, the UK is so overwhelmed by refugees, the Germans, the Danish, so many are coming. All of these are high-income countries. And yes, they are receiving large numbers, but the real amount or the largest number of refugees are actually going to very low, middle-income countries that don't have resources. They don't have extra food or money or water or shelter to give them. 70% almost actually like refugees go to low and middle-income countries, and 70% of them are being hosted there. Imagine. So now you have these refugees who have been completely displaced. They've gone through trauma, persecution. Maybe they had to go through dangerous territories to cross the borders, going on boats. They've left all their belongings, their IDs, their documents. They finally save their families. They reach a new country. Let's give the example of Syrians going to Lebanon. They cross the borders, maybe smuggled in, and suddenly they reach a country that has anti-immigration policies, discrimination. They're blocked from working half the jobs. They can only work blue-collar jobs and only some. So white-collar jobs like being a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, they're not allowed to work.
Yeah.
So they can't make money. They don't have IDs to prove their identities. Maybe if they're lucky, they seek asylum, so they have residency, or what they call iqama. But then they're charged insane amounts to get a work permit. So the husbands maybe were lost at war. The mothers have to fend for the whole family. So suddenly the moms start to develop their own skills. They start cooking from home, selling so they can make some money. And they're doing this all, unfortunately, illegally, because they're not allowed to. Or maybe these jobs they're allowed to, but it doesn't bring them that much money. So imagine not just the stress and anxiety, but also the sense or lack of safety and security, the loss of identities and roles. So the husband no longer feels like he's the father of the household. He carries the house. He's lost his dignity because the mother is handling all this. The roles have switched. Sometimes they force their children to work the streets. So the child no longer becomes a child. And then when you think about injustice or justice, mafi justice, there's no justice. They've lost their homes. Nobody's supporting them on either side. And they have no purpose or existential meaning. They feel like, what's left to live for? Why did this happen to me? And last but not least, their bonds and networks are destroyed as well because they've left family behind. Maybe they've lost loved ones through the wars. So all of these systems, when broken, impact their mental health in a very extreme way. And for interventions and programs to really, really treat the root cause, as we say, like really help them, do you think telling them or giving them therapy will help them?
I was going to ask this question.
Yeah.
Will it?
So,
can it?
To an extent.
Yeah.
To an extent. If you have other priorities, like you don't have a house, you can't feed your kids, you don't have a job, it's not enough.
Yeah.
It can help you learn to manage maybe your emotions a bit better. Maybe you have somebody to vent to, which is really important. We're not dismissing the power of that. But we have to think more holistically. We have to think about how do we help address all their needs or most of their needs or the basic needs while supporting their mental health. Because someone who has, most people see it as first give them house, give them food, give them water, and then give them jobs, and then look into their mental health. What we say is no, you need mental health in every step. So in order for somebody to strive to get a job, they need good mental health.
Yes.
You don't have to be super joyful, but you need at least to be able to get out of bed and apply for jobs, to feel like you can get it, to get food, to support your family. You need mental health in every stage. So we see it in a holistic way. So that's why that Healthy Kitchen, Healthy Children initiative was so smart. It helped empower them financially so they can support the family, gave them a new role. They felt they had purpose, and beautifully they supported the community. So it wasn't just them being supported, they're supporting their families. The children who go to school get to eat healthier, and at the same time they have a better quality of life. That to me is a winning intervention. And we rated all the interventions, and I'll tell you an example of one that maybe wasn't as successful, perhaps. There is techniques that are trauma focused. One of them is known as EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Okay.
So basically what that does is a trained clinical psychologist or psychiatrist who is trained in EMDR will deliver this. And the idea is that you tell your client or patient to retell the narrative of their story. So tell me what happened to you. What was your experience coming from Syria to Lebanon? And as they start to tell their story, they start to get emotional, they're triggered. So at the same time, the clinician holds a finger out and asks the patient to follow the eyes.
While talking?
Yes. So follow my finger while you are talking.
Okay.
And that creates a sense of work overload in the brain. So the brain gets confused. They're like, oh, I need to follow this. And I'm telling my story. It causes a reduction in emotional, strong emotions and frustrations, because it almost regulates your emotion because you're focused on another task. And the more you do it, so if you do, they found that within 2 to 4 sessions, you can see a huge effect that every time this person says, talks about their story and the narrative and the sad, traumatic experience that they've been through, it's not as traumatic for them. Their body does not react as strongly, and it's not dismissing, it's just teaching it to deal with the pain. And while that one was very effective in terms of, very feasible, showed power, like they reported better well-being and mental health, it was individual. So it wasn't reachable to a larger community, which is what you need. You need things that are affordable, reachable to larger communities. You need to start building bonds. You need to think about the other challenges they face. So integrating into a new community is very challenging. Trying to belong with Lebanese and Syrians is a big challenge. So many Lebanese right now, and this is published in the literature as well, find tensions and frustrations, and there are rising tensions between the two communities because Lebanese feel a threat or perceive a threat that Syrians are taking over many of the resources that they already have. So it's not new news that Lebanon's economic crisis has caused Lebanese to fall under the poverty line. So now you have Syrian refugees and you have poor Lebanese people, and yet only the refugees get free access to healthcare services. They get some get cash allowances monthly, whereas the Lebanese, who are the nation's country, they are the nationals, they don't. So this creates tension and disparity. So when these tensions rise, you see the risk of political violence, isolation, mental illnesses. You see people attacking others, between the community, which is very, very dangerous, particularly as Lebanon hosts the largest number of refugees per capita in the world. So what that means is for every 4 Lebanese, there is 1 Syrian refugee. Imagine, 1 in 4. 1 in 4 are Syrian refugees, largest in the world. So when your population is so equally distributed, you need to find solutions to integrate them together. And one of them is to give equal resources. So if you're going to give free healthcare to the Syrians, give it to the Lebanese. If you are going to develop or deliver a mental health intervention that trains them how to cook, give it to the Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese. You have to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are taking it one step higher when they really hit it on the head, is they actually build bonds between the communities. Maybe it's a support group. It's just as simple as a support group. They're learning new skills on how to problem solve, and they're doing it in teams. Maybe they have to do an exercise with someone who's from a different community. That to me is powerful, more powerful than anything else. Yeah.
Oh, nice. So since we went into like mental health, so what's your definition of mental health? يعني how can someone determine if he's in a good mental state or not?
Yeah.
Or let's say you personally, how would you define mental health?
Mental health is defined not as just not having any disease or not feeling bad or unhealthy. It's also about having good well-being. So that means your ability to be physically, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically present. It means you're stable on all of these. You're able to socialize with people. You are able to eat well and healthy, like you do it yourself and you empower yourself. You're able to move and function. So I would argue that somebody who's just had a terrible physical injury on a wheelchair probably doesn't have good mental health, because they can no longer walk or they can't do the exercises they love to do. So that functioning, the ability to physically function and emotionally function, is part of the components. It's very multifaceted. And if someone wanted to briefly assess, there are some great validated scales that have been tested in many populations that can determine whether you are suffering from anxiety or suffering from depression. And you can do it yourself. You can do it yourself. And I highly recommend people use those resources and scales, because it may encourage you to see, okay, when I calculated my results, I found out I was moderately anxious, or I was mildly depressed, or I was extremely depressed.
What are those things that you could?
So one very popular scale that is commonly used for depression is called the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, PHQ-9. So people can Google PHQ-9 Arabic version, PHQ English version. It's a 9-item questionnaire that asks you about physical and mental symptoms, and rated from a scale of 1 to 5, where 1, you barely feel it, 5, you feel it all the time.
Okay.
And you answer questions like, I feel my stomach hurts sometimes, or I feel anxious, and you respond, add the scores, and it will give you a range of scores. So it'll be, if you got a total score of 0 to 9, you don't have anxiety, or you have very mild anxiety, or a score from 9 to 15 or 16, you have moderate. 16 and above, you have very high anxiety. So I would typically say someone who is suffering from moderate to severe anxiety, recommended go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And there's an equivalent one. So PHQ is actually for depression, but there's an equivalent one for anxiety. There's an equivalent one for most mental disorders, but I typically go for depression, anxiety. These are the main ones. So the GAD-7 is also the anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder scale. It's a 7-item scale, whereas the PHQ-9 is a depression scale. And once you determine your total score, do reach out to a therapist or a psychologist to further assess, how do you deal with this? How do you work on this? Those are the key things. So mental health, sometimes we don't notice that we're going through a hard time until we stop. Many of us are in this world where life is so busy. We're working 24/7. We're on our phones 24/7. We have very little one-on-one interaction. Some of us don't even go outside anymore. We go from our car to the mall to our homes. And then if we visit someone, we're going inside again, and we're not in touch with nature at all. And we need to build very small increments of time during the day, ideally in the morning, where we separate and detach from technology, from our thoughts and kind of build a presence of silence. I think praying 5 times a day is one of the most powerful things you can do, right? And it's broken up. You have so much respect for religions like Islam because of that, because they've literally built in a system of meditation and reflection in your life throughout the day, so that no matter what you're doing, no matter how busy it is at work,
you just stop and
go pray. You have to do it. It's this time of day. You have to go. So imagine if we all had those practices a little bit more. Maybe it's 10-minute walk outside or just to get some fresh air. I know we use the heat as such an excuse to not do this, but it's a reminder to see how you feel. Because I think a lot of us at this stage in our lives, we actually don't know how we feel. If I asked you, maybe not so much you, but if I asked somebody else, how are you feeling today? They're like, I'm fine. That's the automated response. But are you really fine? Are you really okay? Like, what do you, is today a good day for you? Is it not so good? And
I just feel in general, people are asking, how are you as a default question. It's very rare someone asked me, or I've seen anyone like asking me, how are you, to actually know how am I doing. It's just it's a default response. Oh, hi, how are you? And they're not even waiting for my good or not good. Is that true?
So true.
Yeah. And I feel everyone is so caught up with everything, and I don't think they look at this because it has a huge impact.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, because I mean, it's almost sad in a way, because you have to pretend you're not good when you're good when you're not good. But some might argue, like, actually, when I lie and say I'm good, it's like fake it till you make it. So they think, oh, I put a happy face on, that it helped me, or I interacted with someone today and it helped me. But I agree, we're not as honest as we used to be. And that doesn't teach us to express our emotions in a healthy way. And I'm guilty of it myself. Like, I'm still learning. We're still learning what is the best way of, showing anger. Many of us see anger as a very problematic emotion. It's shameful. It's embarrassing. It's not respectful. So most of us will just, especially women are taught to be reserved, be passive, don't react. If somebody angers you or insults you or disrespects you, don't yell, don't shout out loud. Why? Why? So we need to understand, why is it okay for a man to do it and why is it not okay for a woman? And when a guy does it, oh yeah, it's okay, it'll blow over, he'll be fine. Or when a woman does it, she's so emotional, she's so volatile, it must be that time of the month. And we need to learn how do we express emotions? First of all, what does anger look like in a healthy way? Can you say it to the person immediately? Are you the kind of person who needs to inhale, exhale, take a second, maybe step away from it and come back to it?
But that comes to self-control as well, and knowing how to deal with stuff. Yeah. So if someone is already in not a great mental state, I don't think they're in control of their thoughts and emotions and anger. So that makes them not mentally, I wouldn't call it stable, but somehow they need to seek, because the anger comes from something in the past or some kind of trauma they went through. Yeah.
I completely agree. It's the dysregulation, like how, as you said, we blocked it. So women especially, they block the anger, or the male, whoever it is, keep blocking that anger. They don't fully release it. It piles up, or they explode on someone who didn't deserve the anger explosion. And that's another way in which anger manifests. And it's unfair to both sides, because here you have somebody who hasn't digested their emotions very well. And there's that famous book, The Body Keeps the Score, that tells us when you go through mini traumas or microaggressions. So a microaggression could be someone came and told you, oh, did you put on weight today? Or like very small. And Muna has a tough demeanor. She's like, it's not going to bother me. But then these comments, you're walking down the street, someone throws a comment at you. We have a culture of catcalling in the Middle East. So the women especially, they get harassed. And you're like, whatever, I'll ignore it. But it adds up and it collects into the body. It collects in areas. And there's fMRI research that's shown this. There are psychosomatic diseases, which mean people who go through very extreme traumas, like the refugees, for example, and they don't say they're mentally ill or they're depressed or anything. but they'll complain of lower back pain, or they'll complain, they have epilepsy, they develop epilepsy from after this incident of displacement or being kicked out due to war. And so you're thinking, how? There was no reason, there's no genetic predisposition. They weren't physically exerting effort in a job that caused the lower back pain. They're young. Why are these diseases coming? It's the inability to process emotion psychologically, takes energy and gets pent up into the body and manifests in a physical way.
Yeah. I wanted to ask this and how much it's linked to your mental state to diseases like, let's say, diabetes, hypertension, Alzheimer's, and cancer. So is there a direct link to how much stress you have, the trauma you've been through, to the diseases?
100%. So my specialty is stress and illness. It's one of my favorite topics, strangely enough. So we know that stress has a biological mechanism in the body that can lead to disease directly. Now, there is if anybody's interested in this topic, it is also known as psychoneuroimmunology. So it brings in your immune system, your nervous system, and your psychological responses and behavior together to say how one goes to the next. So with psychological responses such as stress, we know that it increases hormones like cortisol. When you have too much cortisol for a brief period of time, we know that's healthy.
Yeah.
Some stress is good stress. It pushes you to be more productive, effective. It makes you want to work and have a drive. But then too much of it over a long time, over a chronic period. So if you're always stressed about everything in your life, or you're overwhelmed by all the things you have to do, that develops constant spikes of cortisol in your body that starts to trigger the other inflammation process. So the inflammation process starts to react through the cortisol, and this is all connected. So you become more inflamed through chronic cortisol spikes. Your body starts to flare up. And if this continues, if you are not, for example, planning stress management techniques such as heavy breathing, meditation, yoga, reading a book, grounding yourself, going for nature walks, or any sort of exercise, if you keep avoiding these habits, this will develop into disease. We know that cancer is very much based on high inflammation. We know diabetes is a high inflammation. It is glucose spikes. So imagine a body that is constantly highly inflamed and hot and angry, and you're throwing in the glucose spike reactions where it's freaking out because your immune system is working extra hard to reduce the inflammation, because your body knows what it's doing. If you ever suffer disease, it will work to make sure you don't get it without you even knowing or feeling it. All of us have cancer cells. Cancer cells are constantly growing, but our bodies trained to react and shut those cancer cells down. When does it stop working? When you overload it. When you eat bad food all the time and you eat too much of it, and your mitochondrial cells, which are responsible for energy, struggle to break down because you're eating way too much. Or you eat dinner at 9 and you go to bed at 10. Your body's job when you sleep, part of it is to refresh your brain, refresh your energy, process, recover, digest. If you're giving it such a small window because you give it more food to digest, you're not giving your cells a chance to really come back to its fresh point. So psychoneuroimmunology tells you that stress can have such a detrimental impact. It can even shorten your genes. So there's a really, really excellent study on telomeres. So telomeres are the caps on top. So imagine a pen with a cap.
Okay.
All our genes have a cap on top and a cap at the bottom. When you suffer a lot of stress, it turns into oxygen that is not fully O2, it is O only. It is one oxygen, so one O. And that oxidative stress starts to rub against the top of that cap.
Okay.
The more it rubs, the more it's destroying and shortening the gene. What does that look like in your body? You start to age, you look older. It shows wrinkles, it shows tiredness, fatigue. Your whole body systems eventually are at risk of developing gene mutations that lead to cancer. One of the main reasons that cancer is developed is a gene mutation. It just switches off in a weird way or turns into something else. It mutates and causes cancer. So when you're cutting the caps that protect the pen or the gene, you're about to break the pen. The pen explodes, turns into many cells of cancer. You get cancer. So that's the direct link to psychology, oxidative stress, breaking down these genes, turning into cancer, going into diabetes, going into heart disease. So it is probably one of the main reasons we all develop disease in our generation and time. If you look at 20 years from now and you look at all the countries around the world that have aged and how long they've lived, you'll see the obvious things, which is in Africa, they live up to the age of 40, 45 maximum. And then when you go more to developing and high-income countries, there are people living to 60, maybe 70. Now, the average age of length is around 80, which is amazing. It's a huge feat for the world. And this is all thanks to medical developments, vaccines, being able to share food, deliver food to everyone, shelter, safety. All of these have factored in why we live longer and live better. Even the poor countries are living a little bit longer, almost 10 years longer than they on average. But with that said, that comes back to the aging populations.
Yeah.
What do you do there? And as we get older, we didn't see cancer as much before because we didn't live long enough to get cancer. We don't see type 2 diabetes as much because we didn't have so much processed food. We didn't live in a world where our diets were McDonald's and fast food.
True.
And we get heart disease because we have sedentary lifestyles. Our normal life, if you ask your parents or grandparents, be like, we're never sitting down at home. We're playing outside on the streets with nothing, with a stick. And we don't have cars, so we walk everywhere. And if we got a car, it's just to get to our jobs. And the rest of the time, we don't have convenient food to buy. So it's not like you're going to stop at a cold store and get yourself a piece of chocolate or chips or whatever is it, even a banana or apple. You know, you're not doing that. You're eating the meals at the right time. So sedentary lifestyle, living longer, terrible food, and just in general, having a lack of ability to understand what matters in your health can impact you to get these diseases. And stress plays a big role because we live these very busy, demanding, high expectation lives and jobs that we survive in.
At the end of the day, we don't want just a number and say someone lived for like 100 years, but the last 30 years of their life sitting in a wheelchair.
Exactly.
So it's the, do you call it the lifespan?
Yes, exactly. The lifespan versus health span. So lifespan is how long you live. The health span is how long you live, but in a healthy way.
Yeah. So it's very important to make sure everything, like mentally, physically, you're just taking care of your body in so many ways.
I wish more people would be aware of that, but that's what we're trying to do.
Last question I wanted to ask you. So how much do you, when you talk to your medical students, do you give them so much awareness about training and how much it impacts like mentally for them, especially for them as med students? Like you said, busy life, studying all day, it's long years and longer hours. So are they looking into their health as well? Because there's a lot of I wouldn't say all of them, but most of the doctors I know, like let's say my generation, they lack their own health as well. So
totally.
So
we do, but I'll tell you this, you make a really good point. The doctor should present themselves as the ultimate beneficiary of their message.
Yes.
So if they're not following the guidelines, why would the patient follow it? So if you go to a doctor who's smoking and overweight, and he happens to be a cardiovascular specialist, you're like,
why would I
get his advice or her advice? We definitely preach that to the students. So we have what's called the UPenn resilience skills. So there are a certain number of faculty, including myself at RCSI, were trained by a UPenn team, University of Pennsylvania's positive psychology program. And Martin Seligman, who is basically the father of positive psychology, founded the program to teach all types of populations, whether they are war veterans, army men, pregnant women, medical students. How do I become more resilient? And within that context of skills, we have a package of skills about falling into thinking traps like catastrophizing and reducing your chances of catastrophizing, but also how do I manage myself and my emotional regulation and my physical behavior? And one of the things we emphasize is exercise. Now, I agree, it's a very small part of the curriculum, teaching them how to take care of themselves so that they can take care of their patients. And exercise becomes a very tiny thing in there. Lifestyle medicine, which is literally a 1-week module taught within the year. And sleep is one of 6 components. The other are nutrition, sleep, exercise, stress management, alcohol intake, and smoking. So you literally have a day really where you're being told that exercise matters, which is not enough. Now, they are given guidelines about what is an ideal amount of exercise, what type of exercise, how much of it to do, what the actual benefits are to your health. So you know this better than I do about reducing sedentary lifestyle, maintaining healthy hearts.
Muscle mass, better bones, and...
Exactly. So the benefits are huge.
Yeah.
But we've been trying to advocate to push for it a little more.
Do you think this is just here or it's an international thing?
Oh, it's an international. I think RCSI is one of the much better medical schools where they incorporate UPenn skills like resilience and lifestyle medicine, and they're trying to put it even more forward and as a core component of the curriculum so that students can take care of themselves. Now, there are community engagement activities, but they're few and far between. And if you speak to any physician who went to a medical school that is very well known and highly regarded in the US or the UK or Europe, they'll be like, we never learned how to advise on nutrition and exercise. We don't know how to do it. Yeah. And we now realize that that is the most important thing when we're trying to advise our patients. And we don't even know how to do it. Yeah. We're not trained.
Yeah. That's the thing. They're not trained to know, not to give advice. They don't even know the answer. You know that I have one client that has like severe migraines her whole life. And khalas, she said, this is me. And I've been born with the genetics or whatever. Khalas, she's convinced that I did everything and nothing helps. So I just gave her electrolytes and she started training and it's been such a long time that she didn't get migraine. So, you know, sometimes it's not too deep. Sometimes it's very basic.
I agree.
Instead of going to medications and scans and doing stuff, but there are things that are missing. So like you said, maybe the medical students or a doctor wouldn't get so into like, oh, are you training? Are you drinking enough water? Do you have electrolytes? Do you have, you know?
So I completely agree with you. I think we need to know the basics of their habits and understand what they're doing. It could be as basic as you said, their diet's terrible. They don't sleep well.
Yeah.
And they don't exercise. Like I think those are the 3 common components that are problematic, and most people go to doctors. But on the other end, a doctor will tell you, if I go into those questions, the patient will think I'm dismissing their symptoms. And there's where the balance lies. So now what's changed is, for example, we have models of how do you communicate with the patient when you first meet them. So for example, all physicians are required to ask patients if they smoke. And if they do, they have to assess them immediately. So it's called the 5 A's. So you ask, you assess, you advise, and then you refer them to a specialist. So if in case they need it and they're contemplating, so you're assessing their readiness for change, you're assessing how much they smoke, how often, how long. You tell them immediately you should quit smoking because of X, Y, Z. And all of this happens in a couple of minutes. So this is a requirement for all physicians. They're trained.
It's mandatory.
100%. I wish they applied it to exercise, right?
Yeah, because it is a huge thing as well. So I would say maybe, I can't say a number, but most of people wouldn't want to say, yes, I do smoke if they do actually smoke. a patient would be like, okay, this is not relevant. Why would I tell him if I smoke? Or like, I'm too embarrassed. Or many girls smoke now and wouldn't want to say it.
Yep.
Or like, let's say they're with someone that doesn't want to say. So can you imagine if someone asks you like, okay, I'm not going to say it, even though deep down they know that this is maybe one of the cause. But imagine if they ask, do you exercise? They would be honest. No, I don't. Okay, you should, because it is benefits this, that.
Yeah. I love that
يعني
idea.
as simple as there's blood circulation. So when you explain scientifically to the patient what does exercise do, they wouldn't think that I'm dismissing your symptoms or your chronic pains that you're going through.
I completely agree.
Do you agree?
I wish we had a package of these lifestyle questions of like, let's ask them unrelated to what you're going through. Do you smoke? How much? If they say no, even if they do, do you move? Do you exercise? What kind of exercise? How often? How is your sleep? Are you managing your sleep well? All of these components, if somebody asks them to begin with, just because you have the patient there, you take advantage and you ask them the right questions, could be a game changer in how you manage the patient.
And let's be honest, as a patient, you would always trust sometimes a doctor, whatever he would tell you. If he would say, please do not exercise for a week because you need to recover, I would say, no, the doctor told me I should not exercise. صح ولا لا?
Of course.
And if the doctor tells you, go walk, go train, you would immediately say, oh my God, if the doctor told me to do so, I will do so. But I do understand maybe the doctor does not want to take a risk. Like, let's say maybe I don't know, what will you do as in when I tell you go exercise, but it should be there in our heads. So the doctor would recommend you to actually train. And when I say train, I don't mean just walking outside. I mean actually train, resistance training.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the patients who truly need it come when it's too late. When I mean too late, not as in they're on their deathbed, but they've been diagnosed with the disease.
And it's so hard to change that.
And sometimes it actually, because they ended up being diagnosed or they had a stroke and they survived, they're like, it's a wake-up call suddenly.
It is.
And you hear about those people who have a stroke and suddenly they're running marathons at the age of 50 and they've never run in their lives. And you're like, that's wonderful. It's a great success story, but why wait till you got a stroke? Why? Yani, you waited 50 years, you got a stroke, and that you could have died through that stroke.
Yeah.
So I think awareness plays a role. I think increasing awareness is so important. Understanding privacy and confidentiality. You mentioned really important parts about the culture. Women may not be comfortable to disclose that they're smokers. Some people may not be truly honest. And building honesty rapport with your physician is hard. You can't develop it in 5 minutes.
Unless you can be honest with yourself and you do your own research and education about things that you need to be doing.
Yeah. I think that's key.
And in terms of like physical health and mental health, because I know it's a bit taboo for people to go seek a therapist to talk about their traumas, childhood, or whatever it is. Maybe it is better like nowadays, but it is still like taboo in some families to say like, no, I don't need therapy. There's nothing wrong with me.
There's still stigma about mental health, even now with people who we think are very aware and conscious, and they'll say, if you need a mental therapist or a psychologist, go for it, you should. But if you ask them, they'll say no. So when I was doing focus groups as part of my research in Jordan with refugees, I interviewed refugee men and women separately, and also by nationality separately. So I had Syrian men alone, Jordanian men alone, and not Lebanese, but Palestinian men alone, and then women as well, separately. And I would ask all of them, I'd like, how do you feel about mental health? Would you go for mental health support? Would you seek support? At the start, a lot of them were like, the men especially were like, no, I don't need it. I don't think I need it. By the end of the session, they slowly flipped and they started to say, if somebody needed it, I would highly recommend they go. And one even said, you know what, I would go too. And that tells you how resistant people are to it, or to somebody else, they'll be like, yeah, if they need it, they should. And I remember the story of one particular Syrian man who broke my heart, not naming names, of course. He just sat there and they were in a group of 6 men. And he was telling us about the history of what he had gone through. And he was saying how he lost his parents He lost a brother to war, a sister. He only had his wife with him. He had a couple of kids, and suddenly he started crying. And I don't think he had ever cried in his, in his short-term life or with these people. He was in his 30s, but he could have been 50 when you see him and the suffering that he had and was carrying. And he was so upset by all the loss. And later, as he loosened up and opened up and he felt more comfortable with the group, he was talking about how the mental health issues that he was struggling with. He was like, I went through a very, very deep depression when I lost my parents and my brother. And it was really hard for me. I felt all alone. And then one of my friends recommended I go see a therapist. And I was so scared, but I also I didn't want to commit suicide. So I said, okay, I'll go. And he's like, after that one session, it changed my life. I kept going. They gave me medication. I accepted the medication. And I think he changed everybody's mind in that moment just by sharing his story.
Nice.
Because a specialist can only say so much. But when you hear it from a peer, from someone from your own community who's gone through it, it is much more powerful. True. And that's the thing about these programs. Yeah, and you mentioned really importantly that we see doctors as authoritative figures. They tell us what to do and we obey them. That's our culture. We listen to authority. But what if you heard a friend who had gone through the same thing? Wouldn't you also listen to them? Wouldn't you also agree to go to the therapist or go to that doctor who fixed her hormonal issue? You'd want to. So, I think it's bigger than that. It's also about community awareness, reducing the stigma. It still is 100% there. It's much better than before, of course. Like we have Instagram to tell us how therapy is important and what mental health looks like and what's bad, what's good, how do we deal with it. People are journaling all of a sudden. It's amazing.
It is, yeah.
It's really beautiful, but it's also they're like, oh no, I'm doing all that. I don't need to go to a therapist, but they clearly need it. And we need to push them to seek help when it's needed. And that means me, you, and the people around us.
Amazing. Do you want to add anything else to?
I think we covered it, but one thing I would love to say is some of the best programs that indirectly or directly supported mental health were culturally grounded. And what I mean by that is they weren't just translated to Arabic so everybody would understand, or maybe they had, visuals that showed people that looked like them. Like we always talk about advertisements showing foreigners, and you really like an ad when you see someone who looks Khaliji, not just Arabi, Khaliji. So in the case of these programs that were targeting refugees, what was powerful is that the ones that were led by fellow refugees who were trained or fellow community members, where they, before they ran the intervention, they had a discussion with the community. They pinpointed community leaders. They were like, what do you think is needed? What is missing? Where are your issues? Get them to be part of designing the intervention, determining what is being helped in is so key and so important. And if you apply this to our daily lives, I'm not going to go develop an awareness campaign on anti-smoking for teens without speaking to teens. I'm going to get the teens involved. I'm going to talk to them and be like, what's stopping you from quitting? Why are you doing? I might do focus groups. I'll get them to be involved in designing the smoking intervention. I'll be like, what do you think works for you? Because clearly telling them it's unhealthy, any smoker you tell that it's smoking is unhealthy, they'll be like, yeah, we know. We don't care.
Yeah.
So knowledge is not the issue. There's much more related to attitudes, belonging, being cool. So I need to understand their mindset. So I need to involve them. I'm not the savior. I'm not the expert. They're the experts of their people. So yeah, I think that's really important to take away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Luma, for coming.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
I feel like we could go for another hour.
Me too. You ask all the right questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this before you leave. When are you leaving?
Leaving on the 16th, so like almost a week from now.
Yeah. I'll see you soon, inshallah.
Yes, definitely.
Yes. Thank you so much again for doing this.
This was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.